This could be the home of your new pot dealer.
We'll be providing a guided personal shopping experience.
The president of Cannabis New Brunswick says it's the first government-run marijuana store in the world.
It is. We're the first jurisdiction in Canada that's ready.
In many ways, it started here.
I'm actually not in favor of decriminalizing cannabis. I'm in favor of legalizing it. Tax and
When new
That sort of sums it up, don't it? Let's play that little part again.
I'm in favor of actually not in favor of decriminalizing cannabis. I'm in favor of legalizing it. Tax and regulate.
When newly minted Liberal leader Justin Trudeau made his pitch. 5 years later, legalization is poised to become a reality, but there are still plenty of questions about what comes next.
There will be surprises. It's not going to be perfect.
Take drug-impaired driving, a concern other jurisdictions that legalized have had to deal with.
We are seeing that more often in fatal crashes, the driver, at least one of the drivers, has THC still in their system. That doesn't mean it caused the crash, but it's certainly a statistic that's going to be worth watching.
The federal government is trying to address that with a new, tougher law on impaired driving. Then there's pricing and profits. Legalizing pot will undoubtedly be big business for corporations, but in the early days, some governments believe it will cost money to set up a regulated system.
I can tell you that for the first couple years, we're not seeing this as a revenue generator at the government of Alberta. We're seeing it as a net loss.
And prices will undoubtedly affect how well the system works overall, particularly when it comes to shutting down the illicit market. That is part of the government's stated goal.
Criminal organizations, street gangs, and gun runners are making around $6 billion a year right now through the illicit trade of marijuana. That has to stop.
But experts aren't convinced it will stop.
And we're very cognizant to realize that the chances of organized crime being eliminated in the cannabis market would be probably naive to think that that could happen.
We still don't know just when legalization will kick in. The government will choose the date with input from the provinces, but you can look for legal pot to be a reality in Canada sometime in August or September. Catherine.
Actually, try October. So just like everything else with this legalization in Canada, they even kicked that a little farther down the road than they told you the first time. So let me play this one more time so you can get a clear understanding of why I'm not dancing in the streets about this Canadian legalization. Let's hear it from the man himself.
It started here.
I'm actually not in favor of decriminalizing cannabis. I'm in favor of legalizing it. Tax and regulate.
Now, the problem is that is exactly what's going on. This is not. We're not getting rid of prohibition, not at all. And there's a lot of problems. I think this little block here kind of sums it up. The first thing you look at is the influence this has on the rest of the world. All right, already you've had Jeff Sessions in a meeting with people from Canada, trying to influence them to vote against it, and not too many people did vote against it, but maybe the people he talked to did. I don't know. I didn't really follow that too much. And then you got this, people around the world looking at it saying, okay, they did it, so now we can, kind of thing. But then you got Jody Emery. For every Canadian with a criminal record for cannabis, today means nothing. We are still punished in many ways as criminals. If cannabis will be legal, legalization activities and pioneers need to be freed from the hate of the criminal stigma, or the harm of the criminal stigma. Government refuses to liberate us. Why? And then Dana Larson. I'm very happy to see the Cannabis Act pass the Senate. Canada's legalization legislation is deeply flawed, but it is also a big step forward. However, we still have a lot of work to do before cannabis and those who use it are truly free and equal under the law. And that was basically all you seen all day was that story. So Here's another tweet from Mark Emery. For me, it's truly sad and disappointing that Jody Emery and I are the only activists in Canada who think this false legalization is a sham, a betrayal, a sellout to government, a bureaucratic nightmare, unworkable, unsustainable, unjust, and fraught with punishments galore. Everyone else thinks Bill Blair is God, and no lounges, no driving, no edibles, no extracts, no advertising, only government monopolies, excise taxes, HST taxes, 45 new criminal pot laws, hundreds of provincial punishments, hundreds of millions for cops, etc., is some kind of legalization. Yeah, man. I'm right there with you guys. I've been talking about this corporate takeover for the whole time I've had the channel, I think. I made a video about this Canadian corporate takeover a couple weeks ago or less, and I refer you to that if you're interested in watching how I really feel. But this time I think I'm just going to go through all these points with you to let you know exactly what's going on, because I had people come over to my house and ask me about this, and they didn't know what to think. And I don't know what to think either, because I don't watch TV, so I don't know what they're saying on TV about this. I know the big headline is that, oh, it's the first G7 country to legalize marijuana, you know, and you'll be able to smoke marijuana and buy marijuana soon or whatever. So, you know, obviously the media being, you know, kind of, I had to dig around to find stories that were capturing like the negative aspects of this bill and especially from activists' point of view. And I found this Vice article to be probably the most helpful one, and it was written by Manisha Krishnan. And yeah, let me just go ahead and read this. Why not? This video probably will be a little long, so I'm trying to get the most important points across first. So if you hang in there for a few, you'll at least see some of the more, you know, things that you should be aware of as far as this Canadian legalization goes so far. All right, so although it's a step in the right direction, key players say the federal bill leaves much to be desired. It's been a long road, but recreational weed finally, without a shadow of a doubt, is going to be legal in Canada. The Canadian Senate passed Cannabis Act Bill C-45 Thursday night with a vote of 52 to 29, with 2 abstentions. The bill now needs royal assent, which could take place today. Canadians will be able to buy weed legally on October 17th. The bill is historic, putting an end to 95 years of prohibition and making Canada the second nation in the world and the first G7 country to fully regulate and sell recreational cannabis. While many are celebrating, some activists, lawyers, and experts don't feel the bill goes far enough in undoing the harms caused by prohibition, including the criminalization of young people and people of color. In a news conference Wednesday morning, Bill Blair, Parliamentary Secretary to Justice Minister Jody Wilson-Raybould, said discussions about pardoning Canadians with pot convictions can't take place until legalization is implemented. He stressed that until that happens, it is still illegal to buy and consume weed recreationally. So there's your first red flag. So have a nice summer, everyone. Marijuana is legal on October 17th. So the cops are still going to be rounding up people for possession and public use, whatever other crime. And by the way, driving while impaired or whatever you want to call that is already a crime in Canada. But you'll see in a little bit how that's even going to be even more of a thing if enforced in the vein of the law or in the spirit of this new law. It's going to be something else. So let's keep unpacking this. There is also uncertainty about how legalization will play out in different provinces. The cannabis entrepreneurs in Ontario still hopeful that private dispensaries and pot lounges will at some point be allowed. The federal government has said it won't regulate edibles for another year. Now, if I'm not mistaken, there's companies that are like really successful companies, pillars of their community, that just simply make edibles. And I don't know what's going to happen to all this. So Vice reached out to people representing every side of the issue to ask what comes next. First, they have Jack Lloyd, who's a cannabis lawyer, on C45's significance and shortcomings. He's a prominent Toronto cannabis lawyer who frequently represents dispensary employees busted in raids, said he's thrilled that the bill finally passed. Now, I'm not a big fan of cannabis lawyers generally. I know if I ever got busted, I'm sure I'd become one really quick. But a lot of them I don't find are activists to try to help legalization. And I feel like they feel like their field is being threatened if cannabis not just was legalized, because that would, they would still have a lot of things to do. But if it was normalized, then being a cannabis lawyer might be a little tricky. And that's just kind of like the whole spirit of the regulation package in Canada. It's to kind of threaten people that play outside of the rules, with basically like the worst possible, outcomes. So we'll see what's going on in a minute. I'm trying not to sidetrack and get off topic or talk too much. So let me just try to get through this, okay? It's a good article, by the way. After 90 years of prohibition, and the government has finally admitted that it's lost its war against cannabis and the cannabis community. We won, he said. But he's concerned about those who will still face charges or who may be charged before the new law comes to an effect. Quote, "You don't want to be the last person killed or maimed before the war officially ends," he says. "Every Canadian saddled with a record because of cannabis must be pardoned, and they are owed an apology." They're owed an apology. Now, you're probably thinking that sounds pretty extreme, but if you remember, Justin Trudeau did this official apology to the LGBT community in Canada on this was posted on November 18th, 2017. I'm not sure if that's exactly when this happened. But he was saying he was sorry for decades of state-sponsored systemic oppression and rejection. And I'm thinking a lot of horrible things happen to gay people and people in the LGBTQ community. I'm sure that you can say, you can find the stories and you can point to atrocities, quite frankly, that has happened. But being gay itself was not criminalized. Now, as far as gay marriage not being legal, I'm not sure what the position was in Canada or if that changed or any of that. That I don't know if this even has to do with that. Yeah, I'm not sure, but this has a lot to do with this right here. From the 1950s to the early 90s, the government of Canada exercised its authority in a cruel and unjust manner, undertaking a campaign of oppression against its members and suspected members of the LGBT communities. Those who admitted they were gay were fired, discharged, or intimidated into resignation. They had lost dignity, careers, and had their dreams and indeed their lives shattered. And the thing about that is when a government's policy is that, then people in the private, like businesses in the private sector, basically that gives them carte blanche authority or permission basically to do the same thing. So this wasn't just a purge of government employees in that regard. This basically turned into a straight up witch hunt for people in the LGBTQ community, from the 1950s to the 1990s for 40 years. And an apology was issued about that. Now, we heard over here that cannabis was illegal for 90 years. After 90 years, for 90 years, they had prohibition of cannabis in Canada. And it was illegal and demonized and stigmatized, and you were getting thrown in prison for the minorest, marijuana crimes. And you know, like we see pretty much everywhere in the world, this was disproportionately doled out to the minority communities and the native communities. So, you know, I think we're owed an apology. Just like this person here said. There's no doubt about it. Jack Lloyd says that every Canadian with a record because of cannabis must be pardoned and they are owed an apology. Okay. All right. Conrad Floyd, owner of Hamilton Village Dispensary on retail. I don't really think I really wanted to, you know, this isn't a very big deal to me, but it speaks to the dispensaries that were allowed to do things and now they're not being offered a piece of the pie. So that's a big issue. And we have Chuck Raffici, founder of Nesta, a private equity firm that invests in weed companies, on the impaired driving bill. I'm going to talk a lot about this impaired driving bill before this video is over, so let's see what he has to say over here. He told Vice that he hopes Bill C-46, the government's law to tackle weed-impaired driving, gets scrapped entirely. The bill would allow for cops to subject Canadian drivers to random drug tests, despite the fact that drug tests cannot detect impairment. Quote, I think it's a red herring because impaired driving is already illegal in Canada, Raffici told Vice. He said he took particular issue with the government's proposed per se limits measured in nanograms of THC per milliliter of blood. Nanogram. Under C-46, there would be fines for having a per se limit between 2 and 5 nanograms and harsher punishment for those with per se limits above 5 nanograms. Wow, you see, that's crazy. And he says, quote, it immediately is going to criminalize anyone who is a medical patient who typically uses daily, as well as recreational users who consume high amounts of weed. You can use a lot of cannabis on Friday and still test positive on a Monday. Yeah, these are the lowest limits I think I've ever seen. I think maybe there might be something low like that out west somewhere, but maybe not. I mean, I think 5 was previously the lowest I've seen, so they start out at 2. Let me see, where is that? I had a chart pulled up somewhere. Yeah, right here. So let's look at that. This is the federal thing under 26, or is that what it is? It's 46. The one they're talking about with the impaired driving, and we're talking about $1,000 fine for the first offense. If you have just 2 nanograms, that's $1,000 fine. And if you have more than that, then, you know, this graduates up to 120 days of imprisonment. I'm sure the fine is something too. I don't know. But this is all unproven shit, you know, like, what are you talking about? Like, I'm a medical marijuana consumer and user, or whatever you want to call it. The level of cannabis I take in, there's no way I'll pass that anytime this month if I quit smoking weed today. There's no way. This guy said he committed $25,000 toward launching a legal challenge against the bill, but he prefers it gets killed instead. Now, that's something I like. When somebody's already committed to fighting, you know, that's some unjust stuff right there, man. And then we have Jody Emery, an activist on pardons. A pot activist for the last 15 years, Emery told Vice she doesn't consider the passing of C-45 to be the end of prohibition because the government is implementing strict new laws, including up to 14 years in jail for selling weed illegally. Quote, the government is completely ignoring the civil liberties reasons for legalization. They're focusing only on the making money and enforcing laws, and the victims of prohibition are still being victimized today, and as far as we can see into the future, she told Vice. And don't forget about Emery and her husband Mark pleaded guilty to a number of trafficking-related offenses in December after their cannabis culture dispensaries were raided. They were each fined $195,000 and 2 years of probation. quote, I would still be celebrating if I wasn't a criminal and if everyone else wasn't a criminal, but we're still demonized every day. It's hard to see the many people celebrating because they're in line to make money. And yeah, man, I've been really like, as I've been following their story for a while, and it's really hard to understand why, you know, the government continuously ignores this call for amnesty or this moratorium on busts, the raids or whatever. And, you know, it's obvious that they don't want to get rid of prohibition because they need it. They need to keep those artificially inflated numbers that they keep talking about. Like that one guy is talking about, oh, we can, you know, use all this investment money to do this and the tax money to do that. And of course that's Trudeau. You know, it's like whenever he talks about marijuana legalization, all you see is dollar signs. So it's just ridiculous that, you know, the activists basically are getting shut out in this kind of corporate style. And, you know, like I said, they need the prohibition still to insulate the competition. The prohibition is for the stiff penalties for outside operators, you know, and the outside operators will affect the bottom line of the people that have the huge investors putting money behind their business to, you know, basically make the product that they're already making. And we're talking about the big corporations in Canada that are basically going to take this whole thing over. You know, they don't want any competition at all. So the stiff penalties are for anybody that does anything outside of their little, you know, window of opportunity that you can do, like the growing 4 plants thing. Like, you know, that was the 4 plant limit. How would that even be a thing? That's such a small number. That's people that don't want any competition. They want to make sure people have to buy what they have, and they want those numbers that they're seeing right now. They know that if everybody, you know, if they basically didn't have this strict of a prohibition still, then the prices would go down a lot. Everybody knows that. It's just the rule of the market. Like right now, we're still feeling black market prices in legal markets all over the place. Recreational, whatever you want to call it, where adult legal use has been legalized. We're seeing time and time again where they're trying everything they can do to keep those artificially inflated black market prices what you're paying by the gram. So Sarah Gillies, owner of the baker's shop on edibles, Gillies told Vice she believes the government commitment to regulating edibles within a year is a massive step in the right direction, but she hopes the approach will be evidence-based. I still say that when they say within a year, you're talking about the Canadian government. These guys have been saying, I mean, Trudeau said he wanted to legalize marijuana right off. And all we heard was, oh, we're not ready yet. And, you know, year after year, we're not ready yet. We're not ready yet. We're not ready. Oh, we're ready. Oh, we finally signed it. But we're not going to be ready till October 17th. So, you know, these guys are the ultimate can kicking down the road kind of, you know, legislative body. I'm not hoping for anything in the near future, but I know that this is a massive step in the wrong direction to not have, you know, edibles regulated in the first place. And she says why right here. There's a lot of fear-mongering surrounding edibles over the past year, she said, noting concerns about accurate dosing and proper usage have all been addressed by the already booming edibles industry. And what she's talking about is that they were putting out some serious reefer madness about edibles. And the Canadian government throughout this whole process and currently has been doing nothing but continuing on the path of misinformation, inflated claims, or unscientifically made claims about the dangers of cannabis. And it's getting to the point where you're like wondering if they're actually just, you know, saying all this stuff just to, again, artificially inflate the price, or continue to embolden the prohibitionists that are still out there trying to reel this back in or whatever. So who knows what the hell the point of that is. But anyway, quote, "We are no longer talking about your run-of-the-mill pot brownie. We have lab testing, advanced infusion techniques, and standardized extracts. Hopefully the government can legislate based on this industry rather than they're concerned about the past." Yeah, and it's not even that, man. They're just ridiculous. I'm sure that their, big corporations will be like, okay, we're going to roll out some edibles, and then they'll have the regulation package already ready to go and sign, and everybody will sign it, and it'll pass, and everything will be fine, except for all the old companies that used to make edibles probably won't be involved. And that will be sad if that's really what's going to happen. And as we go through all these stories, you're going to see different little tidbits like this. You can still get fired for smoking weed. There's a lot of places that are trying to change that, and a lot of places have changed that, and a lot of companies and big corporations have basically kind of silently removed the marijuana from their drug testing regimen because it's basically they feel like, hey, you know what? They were right. What you do when you're not here working for me is really none of my goddamn business. So why should I give a shit if you test positive for marijuana when clearly you can test positive for marijuana for days? So if I don't notice that you're stoned at work or whatever I consider, impaired at work, or, that's the only, you don't just give someone a drug test and be like, oh, you can't work for me because you smoked weed at one time in the last 30 days. That's been the stupidest thing in the world, and it's caused me to have a lot of problems in my own personal life. And I don't expect it to ever change. That's the funny thing, and all these things that keep happening that are positive, there's a few things that it's like, when that changes, this is going to blow my mind. And I live in Michigan, so I'm not expecting it anytime soon. So here we have Anna Marie Ananor, a partner at Ruby Schiller and Ananor Barristers on policing against racialized people. Racialized. She told Vice she's disappointed that the bill will criminalize 18-year-olds who share weed with their friends who are younger than them. Quote, "What they are inviting is increased criminalization of youthful Canadians who aren't defined as youth by the legislation," she said. She's also concerned that cops will unfairly use discretion against people of color. A recent Vice News investigation showed that black and indigenous people across Canada have been disproportionately charged with pot possession since Prime Minister Justin Trudeau came into power. Quote, "This government has shown its default position is to download discretion and authority to law enforcement officers," she said, noting that cops can choose whether to fine or arrest someone under C-45. "We know that discretion has always been exercised to the detriment of people of color." And definitely everywhere, including Canada, the statistics bear that out. And it's kind of, it's sickening. Finally, I have something here from Greg Engel, CEO of Organogram, licensed producer on advertising restriction. Organogram. Engel said the government's restriction on marketing products will need to be in plain packaging with large health warnings are a letdown. And by the way, once again, those large health warnings are all unfounded, unscientifically based. I don't even know, just bullshit, really. Just straight up. I want to refrain from saying reefer madness because I'm kind of using that a lot myself because, well, quite frankly, you got to call it when you see it. But I'm getting to the point where there's certain things where I want to. There's got to be a different way to explain it. It's like pseudoscience because they want you to think that they heard our side of the argument. They're like, "Oh, I hear you, man. Marijuana don't kill brain cells," but and they still have all these things like they changed the word paranoia into psychosis. And I'm sorry, man. Like, unless you have psychosis issues, I don't really think cannabis is a psychosis-causing thing. I'm going to have to see some proof. Anyway, like I said, one after another, just health warnings. Let's look at that. I did pull a, yeah, here we go. There it is. This is what you're looking at. Company name, just no fancy logo or nothing, just company name. It's got to have this THC thing on it with a stop sign. Hey, stop. There's THC in here. It kind of implies danger. Do not use if pregnant or breastfeeding. Really? Do you have any proof that there's any problem with that? Because there's already cannabinoids in breast milk, even if the mother don't use cannabis. That's something that you might know if you actually study real facts about cannabis. Using cannabis during pregnancy may harm your baby. There's no proof of that. And notice how they said using. They didn't even say smoking. Now, if they said smoking cannabis during pregnancy may harm your baby, I could say that you could safely make that statement, although I would say you're being a little overcautious, and I highly doubt that you're going to cause, serious harm to a baby unless you're doing something like huffing joints, which might result in low birth weight, maybe. But really, all those studies that we've seen about that was also people that smoked cigarettes and weed at the same time. And I looked into that a little farther just so you didn't have to do the work, because you're just my audience. You shouldn't have to do all the work. So I read about that. And a lot of these people, these mothers that had the low birth weight babies, also drank alcohol during pregnancy and may have used pills like benzodiazepine and Vicodins. So nice study, but why do you blame all that on weed? So this is just happening right on the package of your weed. You got to look at that. Keep out of the reach of children. Just warning, warning, warning. I mean, I don't see why anybody would see that, even children included, would see this thing and be attracted to it and want to open it up and try what's inside it. Definitely not. But yeah, it's basically taking the culture out of it. I've basically said that before in a video. I feel like I made a whole video just about that. Probably did. Whatever. It's that lame, Like, we're gonna just take the culture out of everything, make it just super plain. We're disappointed in the packaging, he said. Adding the rules restrict LP's ability to create brands, especially when compared to the vibrant products already on display at dispensaries. But he's hoping the digital space will allow for more freedom and that things may loosen up over time. Good luck with that. So yeah, that's one article. Now I see that I have this pulled up, and what it is that I was gonna get into the fact that a lot of people are cashing in. A lot of prohibitionists are cashing in on this, Canadian legalization stuff. We've talked about this Fontino guy before. He used to be the police chief in Toronto, and he's called legalization many names, called medical marijuana blood money, I think, or equivalent to murder or something like that. Just crazy shit. But all these people like John Boehner decided it's time to churn a new leaf and start selling it. And yeah, I mean, Trudeau's no different. He's, like he said himself, and I quote, "I am not for decriminalizing marijuana. I'm for legalizing, taxing, regulating." You heard him. So anyway, this person here, she voted no on the regulation package on the first reading. And she made this statement about how 5 grams, let me see, I think she's got it in here. Yeah, here we go. She said 5 grams is about 4 tokes, she declared, without cracking even the tiniest of smiles. In other words, if I'm in high school, I'm 16, I've got 4 tokes in my pocket, which is under 5 grams, so you don't just take it away from me, but I'm allowed to possess it, right? Actually, I don't think 16 is I think 18. Anyway, I'm allowed to have 5 grams, or I'm allowed to have 0 grams. I don't quite understand. She later apologized and said she meant joints, not tokes. Whatever. But anyway, she voted no on the first reading back in March. And on the second reading, she couldn't come and vote because there was a conflict of interest. According to CBC, she's planning to invest in the cannabis industry. So that came from Lifton Company magazine, Kate Robertson. Thanks for the tip off on that one. But so, there you have it, man. No surprise that's, again, more further proof of people trying to insulate their future profits. Like, oh, I'm going to say a bunch of bad things about weed and make people scared about it and make it so the prohibitionists are still out there beating their war drum. So the Jeff Sessions of the world are out there scaring this artificial inflation of the price up. It's greasing the skids, to say the least, guys. All these people, they're trying to make money off of the same thing they want to do arrest you for, because quite simply they were making money back then, and now they're looking at it like, well, I guess, look at this. I am completely opposed to the legalization of marijuana. That was just in 2015. That Fantino. Now he's all in. All the chips are in, and it's time to make money. So that's another big problem I got with what's going on in Canada. And no surprise, there's not a whole lot of people talking about that. Here's another piece that came out. This is Cision. I'm not sure who that is. Newswire.Canada. News provided by Health Canada. And in here we have quick facts about the bill. So it is passed and waiting for royal assent. Until the Cannabis Act comes into full force, cannabis remains illegal across Canada, unless authorized for medical or scientific purposes. Once in effect, the Cannabis Act will allow adults subject to provincial or territorial restrictions to purchase fresh cannabis, dried cannabis, cannabis oil, cannabis seeds, or cannabis plants from retailers authorized by provinces and territories, consume cannabis in locations authorized by local jurisdictions, possess up to 30 grams of dried legal cannabis equivalent to non-dried form in public, share up to 30 grams of dried legal cannabis with other adults, grow up to 4 cannabis plants per household, not per person, for personal use from a licensed seeds or seedlings from a licensed supplier, and make legal cannabis containing products at home, such as food and drinks, provided that the dangerous organic solvents are not used in making them. So no extracts using solvents. Check. Once the legislation receives royal assent, provision and territories will be able to purchase cannabis from federally licensed producers so that distributors and retailers can begin preparing retail access online or in physical stores. However, they will not be able to sell cannabis products to adults of legal age until the Cannabis Act comes into force. So it sounds like a government-installed monopoly. Interesting. I don't like it. But anyway, the Cannabis Act creates a specific criminal offense for selling cannabis to a minor and creates significant penalties for those who engage young Canadians in cannabis-related offenses. Driving impaired remains illegal in Canada. Law enforcement can currently detect drug-impaired driving using standard field sobriety testing and drug recognition expert evaluation. Should Bill C-46 be passed by Parliament and receive royal assent, additional drug-impaired driving offenses will come into effect. So, knowing Canada's government and how absolutely prohibitive and prohibition-leaning they are, I feel like 46 is a shoo-in, guys. I feel like that's like the compromise for 45 to get certain votes from certain, politicians that didn't want to put their name on this. They were like, "Oh, don't worry, guys. If I vote for this, they're going to vote for mine," which is the one that does this thing that makes it so it's more crime involved and more power of the authority to find out whether or not you're smoking weed and driving at the same time. So, you know, like I keep saying always, the driving while stoned thing is all bullshit. And they're going to continue to keep trying to make money off of it. And this is how. It's $1,000 fine and a summary conviction. And of course, you know, you can go to jail too, but I'm sure they just want their money. Okay, so this kind of details. Let me see. Do I really want to read this? This is about the driving bill that's trying to get passed. And the last word I have on it is it's still not passed. Oh, wait. The upper house approved the bill on Thursday. The government has previously served notice that it will reject the Senate's amended version of the bill and will insert that the roadside testing measure be reinserted. The two houses of Parliament were already at odds over the government's bill to legalize recreational cannabis, with senators approving Bill C-45 with almost 4 dozen amendments. 13 of those amendments were rejected, including one which would recognize the province's authority to ban home cultivation of marijuana plants if they so choose. So that's cool. On both bills, senators will have decided whether to accept the will of the elected House of Commons or dig in for protracted... Oh, don't worry about that. 45 passed, but 46 was intended as a companion legislation to the cannabis legalization bill. However, the roadside testing provision removed by the Senate would apply only to alcohol testing. Police must currently have reasonable grounds to suspect a driver may be impaired before they can demand a breathalyzer test. The bill would remove that stipulation. Legal experts are divided over the constitutionality of the provision. Yeah, that's like basically random roadside breathalyzers for everyone. Conservatives in the Senate led the charge to remove the measure, despite the fact that conservatives have in the past advocated for random roadside testing. A bid by independent Senator Mark Gold earlier this week to restore the provision was defeated on a tie vote. The bill creates new criminal offenses for driving with specified blood drug concentrations and authorized police to conduct roadside drug screening tests for suspected impaired drivers. That was a mouthful. The bill also proposes to increase maximum penalties and minimum fines for impaired driving offenses, especially for repeat offenders. So I guess they're telling you that they can figure out if you smoked weed anytime before you got behind the wheel, and that they want to make you pay for it. And like you can go to jail too, and they want to make all that harsher. Even though this just happened, there was a study that came out that says that you shouldn't have to really worry about any additional problems from this so-called stone driving bullshit if you legalize cannabis. And this is based on them looking into Colorado. And of course, this is always the thinking is that we know people may have THC in their bloodstream, but they may not have been impaired at the time of the crash or at the time of the test or whatever you want to say. And we know that basically if somebody's driving like shit and a cop sees them, they're going to pull them over. 100% guaranteed. So cops don't just let people that drive like shit drive off. They pull you over and they ask you questions, and sometimes they give you a breathalyzer. Sometimes they just, give you a roadside test. So then we got the 14 years for selling pot to the youth. Lawyers say punishment under a liberal pot bill is ludicrous, and I have to agree with this. And this is Sharon Kirkley over here at National Post, another Canadian paper, I think. So under the Trudeau government's pot bill, anyone who shares a joint with a kid brother could end up sharing a prison cell with a terrorist. Bill C-45 would make giving or selling of cannabis to any person under the age of 18 a new criminal offense punishable by up to 14 years in jail, a sentence in line with facilitating a terrorist activity, threatening to commit a nuclear offense, bribing a judge, child luring, recklessly discharging a firearm, aggravated assault, torture, and human trafficking. Like, wow. What a list. Quote, but in this legislation, if my 21-year-old brother, oh, and this is, by the way, this is former Ottawa Police Service Chief and Conservative Senator Vernon White, implied the punishments around the youthful use of pot are weirdly jarring. White comes from Cape Breton. When he was 17 years old and wanted a six-pack of beer, his 21-year-old brother would buy it for him. The fine if caught was $54. But in this legislation, if my 21-year-old brother buys a 17-year-old 10 grams of cannabis, it's up to 14 years in jail. A dramatic shift in this policy, which I don't think has been thought out. White told the McGill crowd, we're trying to stop trafficking to youth. I understand that. But I think there's a reality test that has to be put to this, too. The reality, many say, is that there is virtually no evidence harsh penalties decrease the use or availability of pot to young people, and that's what's really behind the moralistic rhetoric of saving the kids. And by the way, again, I seen another study come out recently as this week, where they looked at it and no, for the 50th time, teen use has not gone up in Colorado and is not higher than the national average. It's actually lower, and it has gone down. So, the rhetoric out there about the kids this and the kids that. What about the kids that are in cages? I mean, I hate to jump topics, but the same people that always are like, oh, the kids, what about the kids? Aren't those usually the right-wingers that are talking about the kids? We gotta not legalize marijuana because of the kids. We gotta nerf the world, as Joe Rogan put it, because of the kids. But in every prohibition that you've ever heard, talking point from is always revolves around the kids. It's either the gateway theory or the psychosis the kids are gonna, the developmental disabilities that marijuana obviously causes, and it's always about the kids. So now you're talking about the kids again, and it's just unbelievable. 14 years in prison, really, for selling a kid a joint. That doesn't make a damn bit of sense. That is not legalization. Legalization, I understand you want to control who sells the weed in your corporate takeover and whatnot. I get that. But this is just ridiculous. Yeah, quit trying to focus on the kids all the time, too, because this is an adult issue. So again and again and again, it's okay, we're just saying that you got to be a certain age to drink alcohol. You got to be a certain age to smoke weed. We shouldn't have an overabundance of caution on this thing with the weed part. All right? Why not? Because weed's not like alcohol. Alcohol's you're going to, the younger people are that are drinking alcohol, the dumber things they're going to do. Yeah, sure, the same could be said with weed and everything else, right? But weed doesn't, part of the side effect of weed isn't that it makes you dumb. That's alcohol. And kids that are getting a little reckless, well, alcohol will make you a lot reckless. And that's not just kids, that's just people in general. And that's never been a side effect of marijuana. No marijuana, people don't smoke weed and then all of a sudden they're like, yeah, let's go, beat some people up, rob a liquor store or something. I don't think they do that on alcohol necessarily either. But come on, man, let's get real with this. There's a liquor store on every corner, and I know that some of that booze is getting into the hands of minors. It's guaranteed. You're saying that we can't let that happen with weed? Come on, man. Weed, it's not that It's not alcohol. And here's this guy. He's a member of the parliament from Vancouver, for Vancouver, NDP health critic, lawyer, reader, fiddler, hockey nut, whatever, Canadian. Mostly sensible, he calls C45. Now we're talking not about the C46, the driving bullshit. We're talking about C45 in general. So this is what one of the politicians said. Mostly sensible, failing to legalize edibles, concentrates, perpetuating criminalization, failing to deal with pardons, banning export of recreational cannabis products, and other flaws are regrettable and must be addressed. Better than the status quo, but not as good as it could be. Well, you know, I don't think them hammering it out longer in Parliament would have made it any better. Or not, you know, whatever. You know, like, they argued about it for a while, and they had those amendments, and a bunch of them didn't make it in. And by and large, you know, like I've said from day one of this channel, like, whenever legalization happens through the legislative process, you're gonna get jacked up big time, man. They're gonna completely treat it unscientifically and uncommonsensically, like it's the scourge that all the old Reefer Madness movies said it was. That's what the government does. So to expect any legislative body of politicians to get together in a room and hammer out some sensible marijuana policy is a pipe dream. It's never going to happen. Canada definitely wasn't going to make it happen. And it's just not going to happen, guys. It's not going to happen. And the Uruguay example is probably like the closest thing to a government-run legalization platform that still lets the smaller people stick around. And there's ways that you can do that. And I like their model. I'm sure you can improve upon it. But this Canadian model is garbage. This is total horse shit. I'm 100% with you, Mark Emery and Jody Emery. Anybody else that thinks this is garbage, you can find some allies. It's not that hard to do, because there's a lot of people that always talk about how prohibition isn't ending with legalization, and I've made videos about this several times. I mean, it's a debate that we have in our community, man. You know, there's people that really don't seem to care whether or not prohibition, their thinking is that the more legalization that you get, the more prohibition is just going to, you know, wear down to be basically eventually nothing. And that's just not the case, man. That's just not the case. Prohibition is the criminalization part. Prohibition says that if you smoke weed, you're a criminal. If you sell weed to somebody else, you're a criminal. You deserve to go to jail. You committed some kind of crime, and there's a victim involved. I don't know who that victim is, especially if all you're doing is smoking weed. But that's what prohibition is, and it's not going away until this green rush fever dies down. But I'm going to leave this video off with, one more time with Justin telling you exactly how he feels.
In many ways, it started here.
I'm actually not in favor of decriminalizing cannabis. I'm in favor of legalizing it, tax and regulate.
All right, guys, that's all I got on this. I'll update it as updates come, and I'll be watching the C46 situation, letting you know how that goes. Peace.